So,
Fun and games today.
fun and games.
Show.
Shenaniganery.
Yes. So everybody missed you yesterday. They were stuck with me.
Well, you probably did almost okay. I mean, how hard could it be? You just push some buttons. You let some people in. You say some nice things.
From Board for N and Sophia Deva made it very easy. And of course, the community we serve was there to support me in full force. And I was so grateful.
Man, how do we get those nice people?
I don't know. We're lucky.
So today's a new day. I guess we have new people. I'm assuming the other ones didn't sleep over or anything.
No. I would love that, actually. No.
Backpack sleepover episode.
Yeah, it was fun. So we've got today, it's all game design, tabletop game design, not video game design. So we have Pat Marino from the Op, also USAopoly, it's known as, and he works with licensed properties. So he did the Die Hard Nakatomi Heist board game, Star Wars board game, Harry Potter board game, all kinds of fun things. And then Eric, of course, is the creator of Loaded Questions and also Awkward Family Photos. And he has a whole bunch of other games that we're going to talk about today. So we're actually going to talk to Eric today. The first time we had him on, we played Loaded Questions.
Just play the games.
Yes. And this time he said he would talk to us. So I'm really excited. So we get to ask him questions.
Game design, tabletop game design, and what can we learn about that for our businesses? That's accurate enough, right?
I think so.
Backpack Show. I didn't really get to cut you off, but it was close enough.
Yesterday, I didn't interrupt anybody.
Oh.
So Chloe's here. Hi, Chloe from Scotland. Coach Woodard is here. Hello. And your dad is here.
My dad, who should be napping, given their early ass morning, earlier than Pat Marino.
I can't nap. I have to go to sleep or stay up. I don't know how.
Oh, you need clinical depression. You can sleep anytime you want, free.
So. I haven't slept since 2005. So I have kids, and I was I don't know. I have to be up in case something happens.
Oh, John Harrison. It's all fun and games till someone loses the dice.
I feel like Eric Poses could make a game up. If you lost the dice, you just make something else up. And Pat probably too, right? They must view the world a little differently.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to learn all about game design today. That's the thing I'm pretty jazzed about. I mean, I took psychological and cultural foundations of play, and I took a few. Hey, Chip Griffin's back in the fold. Good to see you, Chip. Holding down the YouTube. So I'm really curious to know about it. Let's drag in Pat. Let's see what happens.
Okay. Go. I don't touch that button.
Marino. I know. I touch one, you touch the other. That's how it works. Hi, Pat.
That's the game design manager at the Op Games. How are you?
Doing well, thanks. How are you?
So good.
So why did Kerry mentions Nakatomi Heights all the time? Is that because that's the one you put your filthy paws in the most at one point, or like what is that just her favorite?
One I found. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the one I did the most on. That was a really fun collaboration with another designer that's in-house at the Op, Sean Fletcher, who goes by Fletch. It was just a really fun opportunity to take what is the best action Christmas movie of all time and put it on the tabletop, and which you can see it's kind of floating behind me here in the background. I can't do reverse camera angles there. It's back there next to Thanos. There's some games I think I put more months of development into for sure, just because they're some big beasts. So we did a game called Court of the Dead, which is a box that's too big to fit on the shelves behind me. And that one was probably 18 months of nonstop focus. So that would definitely be a trophy in my case, I guess.
Where do you keep that thing? In the garage? Like, where is that?
So the shelves you see behind me just kind of expand. I'm up to about 360 games in my personal collection that I keep in the house. And I have 3 copies of Court of the Dead among those because we did 3 different covers. It was a Kickstarter, so there's different versions. So I have to have them all. And a couple of them are above on the shelf, and then some more in the closet where there's more space.
What makes someone choose to be a tabletop game kind of person versus a card kind of person versus my friends and I who are RPG guys and Dungeons and Dragons and Cyberpunk and all that? What makes you gravitate towards one or the other? What's your thought on that, Pat?
It's a great question. I kind of dabble in everything. In college, I was super into console gaming. I collected all the older systems and had a pretty robust collection of vintage video games, if you can call them vintage at that time. And I still play some digital games too as well. But My board gaming experience was what I think a lot of people had, right? Is you play Monopoly, you play Clue, and all the classics as a kid. My brother and I discovered Hero Quest and played that, which is Hasbro's bringing back right now, which is pretty exciting. We played Magic the Gathering, and that was a big thing for us. And I think because of what games we were exposed to, we went the Magic the Gathering and then the board game route versus RPGs and D&D. We just didn't have that in our friend group. Nobody was playing it. Nobody was going to teach it to us. So we went into that, and then I discovered what's called Euro games, which are, you know, the heavier strategy games, a lot of resource management, little wooden cubes and things like that. So I have this very like tactile connection to games. I really love like premium upgraded components and the feel of all the stuff at the table and the physicality of it. So I gravitate in that direction. I think for a lot of people, RPGs, it's the collective storytelling that you just can't get in other games that are more on the rails and tell you what the story is going to be. We've been working on an RPG, our first one at the Op lately. So that's been a very different style of game design, a different style of testing. Normally when I test a game, you know, you do the rules work? Did people follow them and understand them? Great. In an RPG, it's sort of like we built a system and a story, and then the players did whatever they wanted anyway. Could the system bounce back from that? You know, was really what it was all about, is can it adapt? And that's been really interesting to watch. Like, well, we wanted the players to do this, and they decided that that wasn't what they wanted to do. They wanted to go off on this adventure. But this RPG it's a Pixar property. It's based on their recent film Onward, right? So it's set in that magical universe, and
where the troll teenagers go on a quest.
Yes, exactly. And so this game takes place like historically. It's the game from the film. So they play a game called Quest of Yore in the film, and that's what we're making is Quest of Yore. And it's meant to introduce new people to RPGs, and because of that, it has to be a little more on the rails than like D&D 5th edition, where it's like, oh, you know what you're doing. You know, This one is like, well, maybe you've never done this before. So it had to have some more bumpers on it and things like that. But I think part of what people gravitate towards is what they're introduced to, right? Is so many people I talk to in the industry, and they're like, oh, well, my big moment was I was at a friend's house and they pulled out this game, right? Whether that's Settlers of Catan or Ticket to Ride or D&D. And because that was the game that was put in front of them, that's what opened their floodgate, right, to the games that go beyond the Hasbro games that everybody grew up with into this whole new realm of what we do all day.
So I was noticing that John Harrison is with us, and he said in the comments here, I feel like modern board games are better for video game, RPG, and CCG influence. Would you agree?
I would. I mean, in terms of kind of how you break that all down,
I guess tough, right? Is he saying basically that, you know, we see some kind of dynamic or function or something inside of a video game, and we go, oh, well, we could do that in a board game just as easy, and that sort of a thing. I think he's sort of emulating that. We steal from each other all the time, you know, that board, you know, game adaptation. So you can't get a game maybe like Catan until you have a game like Minecraft or something. Maybe that's what he's thinking. I'm making it up.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense.
Speak for him. Do not speak for John. John can speak ribs. No,
we'll see maybe and I'm kind of with Chris on this one. A little more clarity would help there. But to the point Chris just made, like, we do borrow a lot, right? Yeah. So we are inspired by a lot of things, and we do a lot of borrowing because we do IP-based games, right? So you can see Warhammer Risk, which is a project I did, which borrows literally from another tabletop game and another tabletop game and finds a way to meld those two things together. Video games is really the challenging one that we look at a lot as far as like picking up a video game IP, because a lot of what's popular in video games is things like Fortnite, where you have 100 players, it's real time, everyone's going at the same time, it's very fast. And recreating that experience in the tabletop is very difficult because you'd have chaos at the table, people throwing dice in all directions, nobody knowing what anybody else is doing. And to create a system that can adapt to that is very hard. And what we found is when you try, that audience looks at it and goes, that's neat, but I'd rather just play the video game, right? So it's all about how do we take that experience and do something fresh with it. So Riot Games, for example, that does League of Legends, just put out a new game based on League of Legends, but the game is a game that the characters of League of Legends would play. So rather than trying to recreate League on the tabletop, they've created like a little memory game that is like sort of a cultural artifact of that world that you can now play at home. So it's an adjacent experience rather than a recreation experience.
Which the Witcher guys did as well with whatever their card game was called. I forget the name.
I'm going to go with The Witcher.
Yeah, I know the one you mean, and I'm blanking on it too.
I think it's something with a G or something. But Pat, I had a real quick. I want to throw some highlighter on some things you said super fast, and I watched Eric, who's backstage. I watched Eric nod his head, and you said, "It's." I'm like, "Oh, I just heard secret lore." You said about in designing the RPG, it wasn't like Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. By the way, so many people here are such not gamers that like I feel like we also have to translate English to English. But you said, but a little more on rails. And that's important because what you're saying is sort of like, if you go to an amusement park or something like that, and the little kid thinks he's driving the car, but he's totally not because there's like a little rail in the middle. And so the car's only going to go its own way. That's what you said. And putting bumpers on it so they can't fall off and can't get hit. Like when you're playing in bowling alleys and they put the gutters up so that the kids don't, throw gutter balls all day long. So these are
the kids, not me, the kids.
Well, right. Not us grown-ups. We don't use those. So those terms come into, and we talked about this with Eric, and I'm sure we'll get into it today. Playability is an issue, and what you sort of can expect of a person's an issue. Has that changed up or down since you got into game design? And how much time do you have to kind of invest in that detail?
It's actually a huge part of the process of what we do is right from the start when we're working on a game, we have to decide who is this game for, right? Is it for somebody more with my experience level in games who's been doing it for over a decade, playing and collecting and following the latest news, and where I can throw out terms like worker placement, deck building, and things like that, and they know exactly what I mean? Or are we building a game for an audience that maybe loves an IP but hasn't gotten into hobby games yet, right? And so when we do that, every aspect of it has to be very intuitive. We can't just say, oh, well, this is very similar to those 10 other games you've played. You'll pick it up, no problem. So part of that is how we approach a rule book, right? Is what's the barrier to entry to get this thing onto your table? Because we know among the hobby gamers, myself included, we have a thing called the shelf of shame. Games we've bought but have never actually been played. And I have a few of those, more than I'll admit, some which still have the shrink wrap on them. And with the best intentions, I'd love to play them. They appear to be great games, but I look at, there's a game in my collection right now that I've been dying to play for a couple of years, but the teaching time is about 2 hours, right? Even if you've read the rule book, to get everybody at the table up to speed of like, here's how every system in this thing works, and every system's dependent on every other system. So that game has a very high barrier to entry, and then it's going to take 3 to 4 hours to actually play it after we've learned it. And then the second time you play it, you probably have to do a rules refresher because it's a lot of information to.
Because you're not playing it again right away.
Right. It's like, okay, let's go play Candyland and clear our brains for a minute and come back to it. Candyland, of course, being the opposite end of the spectrum. The rules are draw a card and move to that color space. There's no decision to be made, which is why it's a kid's game, because you're not having to explain like the sort of logic of, well, if you draw a red card, you have to choose what's the better option, X or Y, and why do you want to do that thing? It's just, you have no choice. You are locked onto those rails. And I think some kids feel like they're spinning the steering wheel, but really it's a lottery. Who's going to get to the end first?
That's the worst part, by the way, is trying to explain the rules to your kids, and all they want to do is play the game, and even though they don't know how and they don't care, and they're like, I'll pick it up as I go.
Yeah, there's pieces. Let me move them. Yeah,
they don't want to wait. Chloe wants to know, what is the most challenging game for you to create so far, and why? Was it that one with the 2-hour learning curve?
So that's one that I didn't work on, that I just picked up. I couldn't resist. But the most challenging thing to create so far has probably been the Quest of Your game for Onward. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, right? One of which is that's our first RPG. So there's a lot of learning that happens there in terms of working with writers to get the story right, working with a new type of game mechanic and a new style of play testing. But the other factor is the license holder, right? And so if I was to make up a story for a game, I can kind of tell that story however I want and put whatever characters I can create into it. When you're writing new story for an IP that exists, there are sometimes limitations that are invisible until you find them. So you're kind of stumbling around and saying, okay, we're going to include this type of character in the story. We're going to have players can play as trolls, and they can play as goblins, and they can play as sprites, and they can do all these things. And sometimes you throw one out there that seems to make perfect sense, and they're like, well, actually, those characters don't exist in this setting, so you can't have that. Or those characters wouldn't be evil, so they can't be bad guys. They would only be heroes, and things like that you kind of discover along the way. The flip side is like that game was created with the film team. So a lot of times when we're doing license stuff, you're working with a consumer products team who does license approvals for everything from t-shirts and plush through board games. In this case, we were working with that team, which we always work with for Disney product, but we also got to work with the director of the film, the writers, the executive producer. So we got to go up to the Pixar campus and say, this is the game we're working on. Does this fit? Is it the right thing? Are we going in the right direction? And they've been with us, hand in hand as we go, and making sure. One of the really fun things in the game is Barley, who's a character from the film. You're buying his copy of the game. Like he's basically loaning you his personal copy of the game. So his stickers and notes and things are all through it. And that kind of goes back to the teaching thing of like, he's your guide, right? Like he's introducing you to your first RPG. So he's got these little helpful notes that are throughout the book that he scribbled in of like, well, yeah, this is the rule, but like make the experience your own. And here's how you can do that and be confident in doing it. And it's okay to wing it with an RPG because your players are going to make stuff up that you have to adapt to and kind of breaking down some of those barriers. And we had the actual film team who wrote all of his dialogue, helping us craft and hone the right voice. So it wasn't just, yeah, here's a tip. It's like, here's a tip in his sort of character style.
Makes a big difference. That's, talking about how to work with the licensing and all that is interesting too, because as you pointed out, there's a couple different formats for that. So it's all stuff we need to hear more about. And we're going to do a little panel at the end, Pat. So we're going to drag you out. By the way, it's ridiculous early where Pat is kind of like the same time zone.
Thank you so much for getting out for this.
Time zone is Frazia.
I hate getting here late for the backpack show. Kip, you always arrive just when you mean to.
You were just here at the time you needed to be. So Pat, thank you so much for being here. Stick around. We're going to bring you back for the panel. And now we have a chance to talk a little bit about the old sponsors. Are we caught up on Chitty Chat and the thing? I think we are. Everyone's been really quiet.
Chat, valuable, meaningful conversation. Yes. Chloe says, I never thought about the additional challenges around licensed games. Definitely, like there's rules already in place you have to abide by, like things in that universe you can't change. Canon to be respected.
Canon, right? Lore. Yeah. And imagine the difference between talking to just a license manager person that's like, make sure you get the color right. It's this Pantone versus, the guy who directed the film. It's got to be like at once blissful and like murdery.
Miserable. Yeah.
All right, let's talk sponsors.
Very diplomatic, isn't he?
Very diplomatic. I'm not expecting that in a game designer, Pat. You're supposed to say bad things. Engineers are bad people, but I guess game designers aren't. No. All right. We're sponsored by some people. StreamYard. You can make your own show, only way better. See Brogan.me/StreamYard. You can make a cool show like this. It's so easy to do. You look at how these transitions go. They're so flawless. The only thing we do is trip over each other because, we're both so excitable. But this show is StreamYard. It's just the best. I'm like out of practice after missing a day. Look, if you're an author, but you're too dumb to make your own website, get one.
Stop it. The authors are not dumb. If you wrote a brilliant and valuable, insightful book, but don't know how to promote it online and you need a website, PubSite is the solution. pub-site.com. You can set up a website. It's super easy
and super expensive
for you. It is not. It's free there's a 14-day free trial, and after that it's just $19.99 a month. And the people
it's gonna break your bank. $20.
Stop it. The people who put PubSite together are FSB Associates, and they are the premier book publicity firm. They've been in business 25 years. They know what authors need on their website to promote their book effectively. So PubSite, pub-site.com.
Look, you wrote the book, but that doesn't mean you're any good at publicity. In fact, you're really bad at publicity. And Fazia and her team, 25 years, dude. Nobody sticks around for 25 years if they're bad at what they do. I don't have anything else after that. That was a good one, though.
That was
All
a
right.
good one. So
Stupid website.
Eric Poses, creator of Loaded
Is
Questions.
back.
Last time he came, he asked us the pandemic edition sort of loaded questions we were playing, and he asked us questions. This time we get to ask him questions. I've got loaded questions back there on my shelf.
Yeah, well, Kerry, let me give you a
got-
card, though. Let me give you a card.
Oh,
so
okay.
here, can you get that?
Yep, I got it. Okay.
So you want to ask Eric a question? Let's just bring him in. Oh, hit your
Okay.
button, though. You got to hit your little don't cover his face
Yes,
button.
sir.
Eric.
Okay. Eric, what movie character freaks you out?
I'm going to go with Freddy Krueger. First time I saw Nightmare on Elm Street at probably age 14, I didn't sleep for a good month, 2 months.
See, I could see that the first time by like
I like that.
Nightmare on Elm Street 3. It was getting a little bit campy.
Yeah.
Dude, you need a new sweater.
Yeah.
Yeah. To
was
me,
just
that
bad.
answer is the Cenobite in Hellraiser, Clive Barker's Hellraiser. Not what's his face, Pinhead himself, but the teeth one. Oh, that guy was there
man.
for a while.
It's The Visit. If you watch The Visit, there's this grandmother character in it, and she's so clearly off. It's really creepy. And the protagonists are kids. So for me, it's like just all these alarm bells going off constantly, like, oh, something's very wrong, and those kids are in danger. So that's who it is. But
So
that's not what
crappy-
you're here to talk about.
No, we're here to talk to you about game design. Listen, crappy thing about this kind of a show is that we don't like go a full hour with every one person and ask a full hour's worth of questions. I have a belly full of questions to ask Pat that I'm curious. Here's the one I want to give to you that kind of relates. The language he uses, the things he says. You've been game designing for a while now, and there's people in this space who just live and breathe this space in a way that my friends all did with D&D. Like you could run up to my brother and say, "How many hit points on a kobold?" and he would know. And you know, what do people not catch in game design that they can drag forward to business? Because they get it wrong with thinking of gamification. So what should they be thinking from the Eric Poses catalog of skills and knowledge?
Well, listening to Pat, I was humbled, and I immediately went into self-deprecation mode because he expressed things very well. And I'm not a guy that ever played the RPGs, Dungeons and Dragons. I just try to create games that are conversational and have at least a little bit of humor. So my games that I create, I think about while I'm on a bike ride or a run or at the beach, happy endings there, which I did test out with my family, including Major Woody's Wild Foursomes. I'm not that high-minded with my games. I'm not going to create a Ticket to Ride. I'm not going to create a long, drawn-out, very smart game. I'm going to create something that you break out with your family or friends on a rainy Sunday or a random Saturday night. What goes into it, though, is tons of test play. I'm working on a game right now for the last 4 months where I've worked on every possible component for the game, every twist in the gameplay, every scoring mechanism, and hopefully the final product doesn't end up on Pat's shelf of shame, which I would imagine maybe 20% of the products I've developed would end up on a shelf like that.
What's your worst one, Eric? Eric, what's your worst one? What's the game that, you know, if you had it over again, nobody would know it even came out?
I developed a game called Arbitration, most of which was developed at the bar at the W Hotel in Westwood when I was living out in LA. It was a quiet time there at 2 p.m. No one was hanging out there. So I'd have a couple cocktails and work on the content, work on the gameplay, and that turned out to be the dud of the universe.
I had a couple of beverages at a corporate party at that same hotel. I know the place. It's really odd, but I didn't play Arbitration.
No one did.
Is murdery a word? And your dad says, according to Wiktionary, I think he means Wiktionary it is. And,
well, there you go.
Yeah, so Hal 9000 freaked Kip out. They're answering the loaded question. Coach Woodard says The Wicked Witch of the West. That's a classic choice. And Chloe in Scotland says the child catcher and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
That's
the
a way
net?
back one.
I think they had a net.
It's intense. So think about, they just answer with a lot of nostalgia, right? Like when we answer that question, it pulls from, a really easy place to get to. So your point about I design kind of easy games. In a weird way, I feel like what we see the difference, and this is a panel question in a way. Pat's designing Xbox PS5 and you're designing like Switch, or Tommy Tallarico, who we had on with his new Intellivision, sorry.
Intellivision and Miko.
He bought the Intellivision brand, so he's making a television Miko, and his are all no online, couch multiplayer only, and with Rails built in, so that bad players like me could actually hold their own. Is it? Do you ever feel that feeling? Like you mentioned something about being self-deprecating and all that. You go to game shows and have that sort of weird feeling like, oh, I'm not like these guys. Or do you just like, you just know you're different? Like you're a casual game guy and it takes every bit as much design to do.
I am in my own world here. I have a one-man company, so I'm working on all the development. My family is my immediate test focus group before I bring in external families or people from Craigslist or wherever to try out the games. I do feel like an outsider at game shows, but I'm a happy outsider. I like what I do. I'm up till 3 a.m. many nights, trying to figure out one aspect of the gameplay that'll make it that much better. So I don't mind my place in the game industry. I like it. I know my limitations. Let me put it that way.
We are a test family that tinkers. So is that what you're hoping to get when you send somebody one of these games? If they change the rules to make it easier to play or faster to play, or
fantastic,
just because they want to?
Yeah, tinkering is my word of choice. Often when I'm working on gameplay, I'm always tinkering with what might seem like the smallest factor of the game can turn out to be, a big game changer.
Well, we did it when you were here and we were playing Loaded Questions. The way you normally score Loaded Questions is different from the way we did it, because we were, we didn't know each other that well, like all the other guests and us. So trying to figure out who gave which loaded question answer would be tough. So we're like, just pick the favorite one. You pick your favorite one.
Yep.
And that ended up working out. You do that for all kinds of fun things. So tinkering, I think, is to be encouraged, is what I mean to say.
Agreed.
The kid from Omen, a late entry there in the
Damien, I love you. That's Damien.
It's all for you, Damien. All for you.
Tinkering is fun. Yeah, that's the difference between my kids and myself. So I have a 14-and-a-half-year-old, an 18-year-old, and I'm 50. I love playing out-of-the-box games. I was a mainstream comic book fan. Like all my friends, were all super indie, and I was like Marvel and DC, and I was always that. And I never hacked. My son, my 14-year-old son, hacks everything. My 18-year-old's like me and just plays what's in the box. What to me, I would say that makes the 14-year-old more the game designer, but it might not be true, right? Because understanding constraints, you both are, built. Everything you do is built around constraints. Is that how you build everything in your mind all the way through? Do you just sit around going, how can I put some constraints around a wide open space and make it a game?
Well, it's kind of like what Pat said, where you focus on who is this targeted for? What are their limitations in terms of gameplay? Oftentimes when I'm building a game around a license, you have constraints there as well. But no, you have a wide open canvas and you can go in many different directions with the game. I know when I was developing my Big Lebowski games, I'm a huge fan of the movie. I went after the license for about a year. Finally had something that I thought would work great for the brand. And Kerry's holding up one of the 2 Big Lebowski games.
Ooh, yeah.
And, you have your limitations, but in the end, it's what's fun, what has great replayability, what will people be happy that they spent $20-25 on and get some use out of.
Kip says that Eric is the winner of the best non-cliche use of the term game changer.
Thank you.
And Joyce is coming in with the undead girl from The Ring is also pretty creepy. Joyce.
Hi, Joyce.
From LinkedIn.
Hi, Joyce. Sorry, the Big Lebowski.
I love that we're still talking about it, by the way. You like
Yeah,
that
so
we're talking
I mean
about
that's the
it?
thing too, right? Like we asked one loaded question, and it's the thing. It's the chat. It's carrying the chat. So that's kind of interesting too.
And I'll
We get
back
to the
up a little
hard-hitting
bit.
things on the Backpack Show.
To that point, when I came up with loaded questions 24 years ago, the
Wow.
idea was that a single question can spark an hour of discussion. So I wasn't a game maker then. I was working at a tiny ad agency as a copywriter, and had this idea, and I thought it would be fun in the form of a game, where you have to guess which player wrote which answer.
All
So
right.
that's what started my game career. And as I progressed, I think in terms of games now. So any decent idea I have, I usually manifest itself in the form of a game.
So I just thought of you are, I would say, probably a forced extrovert. You are by your nature an introvert. So you came up with a system that could talk for you, so the conversation could exist. I would argue that Pat is probably self-identified as an introvert as well. We'll get to that in a panel. Is there something about games? I've been working on this theory of kind of Avatar, and not certainly not the Blue Na'vi people, but and definitely not the Last Airbender. But I'm talking about that sense of us, and then our extraction of us, and kind of what we want to put between us and this camera right now. So Eric, you put games between you and the world. I think Pat and game people do. Do we play games so that we can focus harder on that and take the weight off of us eyeballing each other the whole time? Is that why we have to do it?
I do. Yeah, it's a great mechanism for opening up and engaging with other people, unless you're stuck at home playing solitaire. But yeah, it provides that vehicle for good discussion, good hang time.
I think this is a
how I
good.
look at it.
I think it's a good transition point to drag Pat back in. We never know when to do it, and Kerry usually types it, says "idiot," bring him in now. Pat, did that ring true?
Interested. When I'm absorbed, I don't think of these things. So that's why you're here.
I was sort of, behind the scenes there, just nodding my head along of yes. I'm definitely an introverted person. I can bring out the extrovert for conventions and other things, but I think a big part of what brought me into games was exactly what you described, is we have some kind of structure for how we're going to interact at the table, right? So people come over and it's, I never want to have that experience of, I've invited you over. Here's a cocktail. Let's stare at each other for a while until we figure us out why we're here. And whether it's a sort of a party game or a strategy game, whatever we're doing, there's something to kind of keep the conversation going. And I think part of the key to that is, like, I've definitely been at events like that where people like start the side conversation and all that other stuff happens and it's great. And I've been in situations where people are like, no, focus on the game. And it's like, the game is part of our experience, but it's okay to have that like secondary, like, how are you doing? Though I will say I had a gaming group for a while that I would go to, and I'd come back and my significant other would be like, oh, well, how is Dan? I'm like, I don't know. I'm sure he's fine,
That could be
John
gaming
says,
people. It also could be males.
Games, yes. Games plus beer and wine. And Chloe says you can tell a lot about people by how they play a game. I will cheat. I will tell you that up front.
Wow.
If there is a way to cheat, I will do it. And I regret nothing. And Fazia says Chris has his philosopher hat on today, asking fabulous questions. He had a day
Eric's
off.
hat, but Eric's wearing it, so I don't know.
You don't want to see what's under here. This is 6 months of social distancing right here.
Yeah, well, mine's been growing in front of an audience for 6 months, so I shaved it off at the very beginning of COVID just for jollies, and that's what you get. So, Pat, you said something that I think is interesting. Eric makes games so that the game, lights up a party. You make licensed games a lot more than not, and then I'm not. I have to be really clear, because some people that's like a swear word or something. Oh, you make licensed games. Neither of you look at it that way. Both of you have licensed, like licensing, and boy, licensing money sure is all right. If you get enough people to love your game, for the license, they might come for the other ones. Is always the goal. My question and all that is, are you engineering for what happens at the event? I never thought about that. I've only ever thought about your engineering for playability. Are you engineering for the table conversation that's going to happen? I mean, obviously with loaded questions, that's the only reason the game exists. But with I don't know, your dude games and stuff, or Pat with any of your games, when you make
Heist,
horror trivia pursuit or something like that, are you ever thinking beyond the lid, I guess is the question.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we have to, right? Is we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the consumer, and especially with a licensed game, it's sort of like, you take a Harry Potter game and you have to think like, who likes Harry Potter and what do they want out of this experience? Because it's not just like they want to play a game and have a picture of some Harry Potter characters on it. They want to feel like they went to Hogwarts for 4 years or 7 years, or, depending on the game storyline, or maybe they want to feel like they had this close encounter with the Death Eaters and through some spells, and they want to walk having that story experience. So when we test, we're always looking at what happens during the game, right? And sort of the nail in the coffin for a lot of things is somebody pulls out their cell phone on someone else's turn, and they're looking at it's like, okay, this is not working because that sort of immersion isn't happening. And when you have a rich story behind your game and a world that's already been created that people love, if people are sort of distracted, that's not great. And then the other thing is what happens immediately after the game ends, right? Whether it's a co-op game where everybody was working together or a competitive game, what I always want to see is there that immediate desire to relive some of the highlights of what just happened, right? Are people talking about, I can't believe you said that thing, and then this happened, and oh, that turn we almost lost, and I had this great strategy and you blew it all apart. It's that play-by-play that happens afterwards that says like, people were really in that moment. And even with party games, like we see it with Telestrations all the time, is years later, people will play Telestrations again. And, it's a drawing game. So it's telephone meets Pictionary. So you read a thing and then you draw it and you pass your drawing to the next person who looks at your drawing and then writes what you drew.
And has no idea what I drew more accurately.
Exactly. And the point is it's supposed to go off the rails. And we've seen so many groups play it and reference like 3 years ago when that funny thing happened, right? And that's the kind of moment we're looking for. And it takes me back to something Eric said earlier about like sort of the different types of game design, right? Is like the heavier strategy stuff versus the party stuff. And for me, like what Eric does more of in that party space is very, very difficult, which I think people might not realize is when you have a big system, there's a lot of knobs you can turn to get it right. I can, change the cost of a few cards, or I can add a few new characters, or I can mess with this little mechanic over here and get it close. And close with all those things going on is usually pretty good. When you have a very elegant and compact game, like a party game, there's nowhere to hide stuff, right? Like it's sort of the difference between writing a short story or a poem and writing a 1,000-page book. In 1,000 pages, you can have some duller moments and people will let that kind of go. If you're writing a poem and every word isn't perfectly selected, it just doesn't resonate with people, right? And so when you're doing that party game thing, you've got to do the kind of testing Eric was talking about and over and over and over and over again and watch everything that's happening both with what's in the box and what happens around what's in the box to make sure that people are creating some kind of memorable experience that they say, that was really fun, and there's enough there that I want to do that again. And that's really hard to do with rules that you can teach in under a minute.
Kip says that what you just unpacked, wow, he loves it. Mike wanted to know, is there horror Trivial Pursuit? I feel like there must be. There
are two editions. One, you're seeing the Ultimate Edition, which just came out. This is the big one. It's got a board, 1,800 questions. It's got metal movers that you put the little pie wedges into as you collect them. And then we also have our pocket version, which comes in a plastic wedge about that big, and it's 600 questions. So if you want the big all-out experience on the tabletop, you get the Ultimate. If you want one you can bring with you to the bar or wherever, the pocket 600 question one is great.
When you put the pie wedges in the thing, does it like make a screaming sound? Because I feel like if not, it's a missed opportunity.
I wish. We so much of what we do is like we design these things that we're like, this is going to be super fun. And then our production VP, Paul, we call him the dream killer because he's like, do you know what that would cost to put in the box? We're like, yeah, but you can work that out, Paul. Figure it out. Just get this really cool thing in there. He's like, yeah, no, that's not.
Yeah, but that's your problem.
No one pays $106 for Trivia Pursuit, Pat.
Yeah, that's usually what it is. It's like, the price point has to stay around here for people to buy it. And you're like, okay.
That's a conversation that often happens with a licensor that wants to throw this, that, and the other, and you have your margin constraints where you can't do all of that.
No,
you can't have clear cards and things. Well, I was thinking about when Pat explained the two different types. Eric, I was absolutely surprised. I guess probably because of the way I was brought to the game. Plus, again, Kerry and her family played the crap out of that game before this, and I just showed up oh, I'll play with you guys. I don't know. I expected a deck of cards. I didn't expect a board and people and notepads and stuff like that. I didn't expect a thing. And I was thinking about, do games have to be more portable now, or this shape? It looks exactly like the shape of every. The loaded, I'm looking at it as if everyone sees it. The loaded question shape could fit perfectly on Pat's shelf behind. So
Right.
is this a format like a CD, basically?
It is a deck of cards.
I know, but it could be only a deck.
I have 5 versions of loaded questions. So the one you held up is the kind of the original family and friends version with all the custom game pieces, the board, and more content. But I have portable card decks also, smaller box formats.
Cool.
And portable is definitely the trend, something you can throw in your purse, bring over to a friend's house, travel with. But there's clearly still room, as evidenced by Pat's bookshelf, for the traditional Trivial Pursuit size game box.
Big square boxes.
Yeah.
My kids love playing with pieces and things. That's actually part of the appeal, and writing answers down. I think that's part of what keeps them engaged. And my teenager, who would normally play another game on his phone if we were theoretically playing a game, he'll pay attention when he's got to write things down and he has something to hold on to. So there's something to be said for that. But with the pandemic, it's helpful if you can drop all that stuff and get down to just a box of cards.
Yep.
That's easier to manage.
Drag it on and off
remotely. Yeah.
The
They can't
way
pay
I've
Ticket to
started-
Ride on Zoom.
In the last few years, when I'm working on a new game concept, the place I start is, how can I not develop the apples to apples Cards Against Humanity game? So that's where I'm at now. That's the first thing I do is, how do I not gravitate toward that very popular game format that everyone and their mother's doing?
Pat, is there a version of that for you as well? I've got to imagine something popped into your head when he said that, don't make another X, don't make Catan, I guess. I don't know.
It's funny. The first thing that popped into my head is, how many times have we been pitched that game, right? Because we take pitches from outside designers all the time. And lately it's video presentations. People send us their videos and we watch and sort of score them with a system we have. And the number of times we've seen some version of, well, there's a thing, and then everybody puts a thing on the table, and then you vote for which one's the best. It's like, okay, we've seen that. It's hard because our work is a mix of take this game system, whether it be Risk or Trivial Pursuit or something from our Hasbro partnership, or even one of our internal brands like the Rising system that we've done for Thanos and Harry Potter, and we've got Batman and SpongeBob coming very soon
Together.
I wish.
Sponge Bat.
It's Mermaid Man and Batman.
That's a
together.
good idea right there. If you can make that happen, that could be the next trend.
Well, and we are seeing there's some attempts at that, right? With Funkoverse, which is a system that lets you mash up IPs, and that's something people want to do. But it's always looking at, how do I do something when I'm not doing an existing brand, or even when I am? Okay, it's Warhammer Risk. What's different about Warhammer Risk that it's not just the formula of Risk, but it still feels exactly like Risk? And that's always a hard line to walk of, there's an expectation around this brand, the game should play a certain way. But for the fans of that brand, there's got to be something in there that's new and feels different and makes that one worth adding to their collection of all the other versions of that game that they have. When I'm designing just in my own thoughts, I'm always I think the grail opportunity is, there was a moment where worker placement, which is a very popular game mechanism now, was first created. Somebody said, okay, this is how this thing is going to work in this game. And another thing called deck building when Dominion basically created that system, it led to hundreds, if not thousands, of other games that followed suit and used that style of play. And that's always like my goal is, how do I do that rather than taking 6 ways of playing that already exist and mashing them all together and to something new? But how do I do something that maybe hasn't been done before? And it seems next to impossible some days, but that's always the goal.
John says Warhammer Risk equals 10,000 less hours to paint the miniatures.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for somebody to try, because the miniatures are Warhammer miniatures, which are sort of gold standard in the industry for detail, shrunken down to really small. Which for our 3D design team was no small feat to figure that out. So I'm waiting for the obsessive painter to get in there with like the finest, like 1 hair brush and just
with like a loop. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, we have 2 last things about our show. We're heading towards the finish line. So one of them is Person of the Day, where we decide that somebody might have earned this title. Person of the Day is sponsored by pub-site.com. Authors make an amazing site for your incredible work of writing at pub-site.com. We picked today Joyce Betancourt. The undead girl from The Ring is also pretty creepy. That was filling in on the loaded question. Joyce, you now win an apple just like that one. If you go out to the store and pick one up, you're all good for it. You can get an apple just like that one. Person of the Day.
Is that a gala apple? I've been meaning to ask. It's important.
That is actually what do they call it? The pink something or other. It's the pink champagne. So it's a hybrid actually. So.
That Pants Sponge Man.
I like Bat Pants Sponge Man, Sean, and Sponge Bat. If I was you had, I think there was a spider one too. All right, last question of the day. This is an important question, and this is the question of the backpack, which is we're all building on kind of shifting sands. Everything is crazy out there. We don't really have enough space for object permanency, so we can only carry a backpack worth of stuff. This stuff is metaphorical as well as physical. You could choose one or the other. Do choose one. Please do not choose an encyclopedic explanation, but say something like our clown said and say avocado, or say the other kind of
answer, what to say.
Stick-to-itiveness. Well, because Tommy Tallarico, choose one. Tommy Tallarico is like a transformer.
That's cheating. So just answer. Like the guy who said you put another backpack in the backpack and then you have 2. And you can carry 2, and that's not allowed either. So
typical rule breaking.
What goes in tinkering. No tinkering.
Question. Pat, that's your constraints. Put something in my backpack.
So is this a bag of holding that is like unlimited? No. Okay.
Good question, though.
That's cheating. See?
I mean, if you're going to give a game designer a constraint, they're going to look for every way possible to break it. It's what we do.
So
I was thinking a lot about this. Yeah. I was thinking a lot about this leading up to this. And something I've taken from the research I did when I did my doctorate, which was around games, is this idea of hard work you choose, right? And so one of the researchers I pulled from a lot has this whole system he talks about around sort of challenge versus skill and how you have to stay in this flow zone between the balance of those two. But one of the big things that came from his research is a study where they basically gave all these participants a beeper. So that kind of tells you when the study happened. And when the beeper went off, you had to take this survey about sort of your mental health in that moment. So it was, what are you doing and how happy are you in that moment was the goal of the research. And what the research found was things that we enjoy, but that are passive, like watching TV, looking at social media, those kinds of things, although there wasn't social media at the time, are sort of linked to mild depression, right? It's taking you out of your day-to-day thoughts, but it's not accomplishing something. And it's not to say there's not value in that and the rest, but hard work you choose is sort of this outside of the chores you have to do and the responsibilities of your job. What is it that you're doing for yourself that is challenging to you, not beyond your abilities, but not passive either, that you can kind of do on autopilot that gives you some rewarding thing? So for example, like when I worked in higher education, game design was my hard work I chose, right? It was what I did at the end of the day that challenged me mentally in terms of figuring out the puzzles of how to make the game work. It pushed me to reach out to strangers to say, play this thing. But when it clicked, there's that feeling of sort of euphoria of like, I'm accomplishing something here, and it's something I've chosen to accomplish. For other people, it's having the most immaculate yard on the block, or, woodworking, or whatever it is that is challenging and pushes you to do a thing. But there's no one saying, if you don't do this, you don't get your paycheck.
Right.
And
so that's what makes it the difference.
Yeah. And so that's what I always encourage people is find your hard work that you choose for yourself.
Kerry said at the very beginning of the show, when we were trying to decide where we should point people to, we should point to his Twitter, but he doesn't use it very much. That's evident.
I love it.
You were not a Twitter shaped thinker. That was a TED Talk. So I feel like no, but what I like about that answer is it surely leaves you wanting to learn more. Like, I would like to read the paper that went with that dissertation. And I also knew that so this is not a one-word answer. Yeah.
Fazia likes it.
So it made me think of John Harrison, who's in the audience right now, who wrote the book Mastering the Game: What Video Games Could Teach Us About Success in Life. So I knew you'd like John. So, should you ever swing back to the tweeters or here on the Facebook, you should connect with the John. Eric poses, you've had so much time. You must have the most flawless answer that's ever been created to put something in the backpack. What do you got?
I hated Pat's answer. I'm back to being humbled in my
so good, right?
But my first thought was something like Miles Davis, Bitches Brew, that I can listen to while I'm thinking and, enjoying my surroundings, or a one-way ticket to New Zealand, or,
that's me. That's me listening to an answer like Pat's answer. Like,
but to go with a non-physical answer,
that answer was nuanced and interesting.
No, that's what we're saying. We're saying it's such a good answer. We don't want to answer now.
Is it clear I do more of the big hobby games and not the
a little bit
elegant ones? Yeah.
We don't do SpongeBob property.
I'll throw in patience, which is playing a huge role in the game I'm developing now. I've had more setbacks than advances recently, and I got to remain patient. I have a good foundation, so patience will be my metaphysical answer.
I mean, everybody's had a setback the last 6 months. I feel like everybody's. So Kip says, Pat's backpack item: the hard work you choose to do for yourself to challenge you.
And Robert Collins agrees with your Bitches Brew.
Yeah.
Patience, dead people. What? Patience.
Play on words.
Yeah. Oh, and Katrina says, amazing answer that I encourage my kids to follow daily. Which, the patience one?
No, the first one about hard work that you choose for yourself.
Okay.
Pat deserves all the accolades with that answer. I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
You guys game designers steal from each other all the time. Isn't that what?
Do it right in front of each other.
I have a good story to share if you have time.
Yeah, hang on.